Hello, everyone, and on behalf of NHF, welcome to day 3 of the 2021 Bleeding Disorders Conference. My name is Bill Roby. I'm a Senior Manager of State Government Relations with NHF, and it's my pleasure today to be the Session Manager for Blood and Product Safety. We have a great panel of speakers today, Joanna Gray, Nathan Schaefer, and Mark Skinner. There's some housekeeping items here about changing your name. You've probably heard them in other sessions. Since we're in Zoom webinar, you can't actually do that yourself, but please remember when you log into the conference platform every day or anytime you log in, you can set the way your name displays in the little box when you type in your email address. So to get the most from this session, please use our chat box to write in questions or comments. We have a lot of material today, so the speakers are going to try to respond to questions at the end of the presentation. If they're able to, they may be able to answer simple questions as we go through the presentations. Please make sure to give us additional feedback at the end by filling out the evaluation. This presentation will be recorded and will be available to watch online following the conference. Here are our speakers' disclosures for today. And these are Mark's. And with that, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Joanna Gray.
Thanks so much, Bill, and thanks everybody for joining us on what is a very dreary Friday evening here in Washington. My name is Joanna Gray, and I am one of NHF's federal policy advisors. I have worked with NHF on its federal policy, including its portfolio related to blood and product safety for almost 15 years now, and it is really wonderful to be with all of you tonight, or this afternoon, depending on where you're zooming in from. So today, this slide has our agenda. This is always a pretty packed session. We try to cover as much ground as we can about the hottest topics in blood and product safety and availability. I'll say at the outset, we probably won't be able to cover every single thing that you might be wondering about. So feel free to put questions in the chat box or to reach out to Mark, Nathan, or I with any questions. Next slide, please. I'd like to start just by kind of orienting this work. Our work on blood and product safety, drug approvals, product availability is a real core part of NHF's federal policy agenda. But of course, there are many other policy issues that we work on besides this. And so wanted to make sure that everyone attending this session knew that there were a handful of other policy sessions during BDC. Check them out in the agenda. We had a federal policy session yesterday that I think you may be able to find a recording of if you're interested in our work in these other buckets. But basically ensuring that people with inherited bleeding disorders have access to their treatments, that they're safe and effective and available, and that the care network of hemophilia treatment centers is there to support them is really core to what we do. Next slide, please. So this slide has a handful of topics that we three and others at NHF try to keep our eyes on and our arms around throughout the year. There are any number of issues that are relevant to our community. You know, we always used to call this session the blood safety session, and it started, many years ago. We were much more focused on donor deferral policies and rules around blood and plasma donation. Those are still issues that, of course, we keep an eye on and we advocate on, but you can see here there's really very many other issues that we try to tackle as well. The goal is that all of the products are safe and available, and that the community is notified if there are any issues. We will be covering some of these topics. Nathan and Mark will in more detail, but again, if you have questions about any of these that we don't get to, hope you will put them in the chat box. Next slide, please. Finally, I just wanted to flag as just one example of our work in this area, the FDA Cellular Tissue and Gene Therapy Advisory Committee. Like all federal agencies, of course, there's a million words that roll right off the tongue, is holding a meeting the first week in September focused on the safety of adeno-associated virus or AAV vector-based gene therapy products. And I wanted to mention this for a couple reasons. One is because you may be interested in issues around gene therapy. So if you want to spend 2 days getting in the scientific weeds, it is open to the public, and anyone can register. And I guess one benefit of it occurring in September is it will all be online. So you can see the link there. If you Google, you can see it. I think it's also worth noting, as you can tell by the letterhead of the comments that we submitted just yesterday, this is an area where NHF works alone and in coalition with partners, with HFA, kind of our sister organization here in the US, as well as with the World Federation and the European Hemophilia Consortium, because we know that so many safety issues are global, and you'll hear a little more in a few minutes about other global work related to gene therapy and safety more generally. But if anyone has questions about this meeting in particular, again, let us know. But it's funny, no matter when we're doing this meeting, there's always something that has just happened, kind of hot off the presses to share with everyone. And that was it for this year. With that, I'm pleased now to turn it over to Nathan, who will provide some updates of his own.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening or this afternoon. My name is Nathan Schaefer. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy here at the National Hemophilia Foundation. Next slide, please. I wanted to start by talking about some concerns that pertain to plasma collection and plasma manufacturing. And first is to explain that plasma donations are down about 20% since pre-COVID. We're not sure exactly why that is. We think that it probably relates to anxiety around going out and interacting with other folks. It is not the case that plasma collection facilities were not deemed essential, nor were plasma collection facility workers not provided sufficient personal protective equipment. That was a lot of our advocacy concerns early on in the COVID epidemic. That has not been the case. Plasma and blood collection facilities have been operational throughout. But for whatever reason, people aren't donating plasma at the rate that they were pre-COVID. And that is concerning for a lot of reasons. One of which is that the manufacturing timeline for when people donate plasma to when it actually gets manufactured into a product that someone can benefit from takes between 7 and 12 months. So if people aren't donating plasma now, we're going to have a significant problem 6 months or more down the road. So we've been concerned about plasma donations throughout this. And during the middle of probably 2020, there was a significant push from a lot of elected officials, including the president, that said we need people who have recovered from COVID-19 to go and donate plasma, or what is called convalescent plasma. That is really, really important. But it doesn't take away from the reality that we still need people to be donating source plasma. That means people who have not been afflicted by COVID-19. We still need people who are regular plasma donors to go and do so. There's even been federal legislation to expand any kind of blood donation awareness campaign to include language that is specific to plasma donation. So folks on the Hill are aware that this has been a concern. More recently, in mid-June, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection issued some guidance to some plasma collection facilities along the U.S. and Mexico border that said that no longer would Mexican nationals be able to enter the U.S. on a tourist visa to be able to donate plasma. It's not a policy change, it's been a reinterpretation of a policy. The real crux of it is that you can't be compensated, you can't be paid for labor on a visa, tourist visa. But people that donate plasma aren't being paid, they're being compensated for their time. In any event, it's been a significant concern, and there are, on average, a loss of about 400 donations per day, we have been told. And keep in mind, about 10% of plasma collection facilities in the US are along the US-Mexico border. So this is a grave concern for a lot of patient advocacy organizations, including a coalition of which NHF is a key member, the American Plasma Users Coalition, or A+. And A+ has been very active on this issue. There is a screenshot of a letter that the coalition sent to the Department of Homeland Security in late June. Right now, there is a letter circulating on Capitol Hill on the House side, Representatives Brady and Matsui, bipartisan initiative, trying to get as many members of Congress to go on record, sending communication to the administration, voicing their concerns about the lack of donations that we're able to collect right now. So that is a hot button issue. And if you run into anybody from PPTA during the conference, I'm sure they'll probably have a lot to say about that. So stay tuned. We hope to have more good news to report there, but it is an ongoing concern. Next slide, please. I next wanted to take a couple of minutes and tell you all about a study that's going on right now that pertains to blood donations from men who have sex with men, or MSM. It's called the ADVANCE study, and that stands for Assessing Donor Variability and New Concepts in Eligibility. This comes after the FDA made an announcement in April of 2020 that they would change the deferral policy for men who have sex with men. Prior to April of last year, the policy was such that if you are a man who's had sex with another man within the past 12 months, if you have been sexually active, you would not be able to donate blood. They reduced that time period from 1 year to 3 months, which is consistent with the policy change that a lot of other countries have experienced. After that, this study, which had been in the works for quite some time, really came to fruition and got off the ground. It is in conjunction with the FDA, the Red Cross, and the Vitalant Research Institute out of San Francisco. Right now, there are 8 cities where men who have sex with men, gay and bisexual men, can go and participate in the study. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what the study experience looks like momentarily. All 8 of these sites are in partnership with local LGBTQ organizations. The questionnaire asks a lot of questions about PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is very common among men who have sex with men in today's age. So that is something that I don't think we were necessarily considering when we were thinking about alternatives to the MSM donor deferral 10 years ago. But now that PrEP has proliferated so much, it definitely is part of the considerations. Currently, there are 362 participants enrolled in the study. Of those 362, 200 of them are from the Washington, D.C. area. Of all of the cities and locations, D.C. by far it has the largest number of participants to date. Next slide, please. So there's a website if you want to go and check out more. They have a few really quick videos that can give you a lot of background and a little bit more information about the study. There is a steering and monitoring committee that advises the study's progress. NHF does serve on that committee, so we are privy to everything that is going on that we're able to learn about and to share. They are considering expanding beyond the initial 8 cities, but I don't have word on where that might be yet. The study is limited to men who are aged 18 to 39, which gives a lot of people pause and question why. And we've been informed that that is the area of focus because that most closely represents the highest incident group for HIV infection among men who have sex with men in the US right now. There was a congressional letter in support of the study that went around that was frankly very reasonable, very science-based, and included a lot of folks on Capitol Hill who historically have been a little more controversial on this issue. I think that with time and patience and being able to listen to one another, I think a lot of folks on Capitol Hill now understand the importance of taking things slowly and being rigorous and comprehensive and ensuring that any alternative policy does not result in any additional risk to end users of blood and plasma products. If you participate in the study, you'll go through 3 questionnaires. First, you go through an eligibility questionnaire to determine whether or not you should actually complete the more very in-depth questionnaire about your most recent sexual activity. They ask a lot of very specific questions, which is part of the intent of the study. We're trying to figure out if there's a way we can more carefully delineate actual risk rather than just sexual orientation. And then after that, you are able to come back and be considered to possibly donate blood down the road. The research team reports that they have had a couple of challenges in terms of getting to the numbers where they initially wanted to go. And a lot of that results from the relationships that they have with the local LGBTQ organizations on the ground. And of course, COVID definitely threw some wrenches into the mix in terms of their plan, but they are planning to continue enrollment at least through February of next year. And hopefully we will see some results expected in late 2022. And if you have any questions about the advanced study, I'll do my best to answer them later during the session. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk about Stimate. If you recall, last year, Stimate, which is a product that lots of folks use, a lot of people with VWD, but also some folks with hemophilia A, was part of a recall from last summer. The manufacturer, Ferring Pharmaceuticals, indicated that they do not expect they'll be able to actually get the product back into the market until 2023. And that is very concerning because a lot of people use this product. So NHF partnered with our colleagues at the Hemophilia Alliance, at HFA, and at WFH, and we petitioned the FDA to place a product on the National Drug Shortage List. We also were able to identify a manufacturer that is based out of Denver, Colorado, Stack Pharmacy, and they have been able to produce an alternative with the appropriate amount of desmopressin spray, which is phenomenal. But because it's in Denver, we have to go about getting approval for it to be distributed in all 50 states. So we've been sending letters to boards of pharmacy to encourage them to expedite approval of this product because so many people rely upon it. Currently, at least as of a few days ago, it's been authorized in at least 31 states to date, which is outstanding, and we expect that that number will continue to grow. And finally, we did also issue a letter to payers, by that I mean private insurance companies, about why they need to cover the product as soon as possible. Next slide, please. And with that, I am going to conclude with this slide and then turn it over to my colleague, Mark. So you may have heard, if you participated in the session last year, you got a report about the first ever NHF and HFA Safety Summit. We convened in January of 2020, almost 100 participants from all of these stakeholder perspectives that are listed on the slide. The reason we did the Safety Summit was throughout 2019, we saw an unprecedented number of product recalls that frankly wreaked havoc within the community. There were many of them. There were very different considerations. It was a really chaotic time. So we found it important to bring together all of these stakeholders and talk about what happened, what do we need to do going forward, what are the kind of communication channels that we need to establish, how is the community benefiting from the patient notification system that is operated by PPTA, do we need to do any adjustments to that? There's been a lot of work that led up to the summit and has happened there afterwards. Right now, we are in the process of producing 2 pieces of educational materials that are targeted to community members. And we're in the process of attempting to publish an article in a peer-reviewed journal that will likely bring much more exposure to our community and to the concerns that led to the summit and all of the communication channels going forward. We also are planning to give a presentation on all of our safety lessons learned and next steps at the upcoming WFH Global Forum later this year. And we are beginning conversations about developing some global principles with our colleagues at WFH and the European Hemophilia Consortium, along with NHF and HFA, of course. We also, the summit was so well received that we immediately got the feedback that we need to put it on again. And we were hoping to be able to do that in January of 2022, but I'm not sure if that's going to be a reality given where we are with the epidemic and a number of other considerations. But the takeaway is we will have another safety summit at some point down the road, so stay tuned for more on that. With that, I'm going to ask for the slide to be advanced and turn it over to Mark. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you to my colleagues. It's great to be back here today. I'm Mark Skinner. I live with severe hemophilia, but my involvement here is I work as a consultant to the National Hemophilia Foundation on a number of issues, and included with those are blood safety issues. And I've previously had the opportunity to serve in a number of federal advisory roles on these issues and continue to support NHF. What I was asked to share a little bit about today was some of the long-range monitoring and sentinel work that's done as we think about new and advanced therapies coming to market. And this is a nice segue from both Joanna's mention of the FDA meeting coming up in the first week in September, as well as the previous slide out of the Safety Summit. So I'm going to start sort of in a reverse pyramid order, starting at the global level and sort of talk backwards down through the US level and the blood system to give you a sense of the robust and interconnected nature of safety surveillance that goes on around the world. So first, at the world level, the World Federation of Hemophilia has been working diligently over the last few years to set up a world bleeding disorder registry where core outcome data is collected on individuals that live with bleeding disorders around the world. This isn't as a replacement to the Athens registry in the US. It continues to exist. This largely represents mid and lower income countries, so we can have robust data to add to the data collection that occurs within established registries in Europe and in North America. But more recently, the World Federation has taken the initiative to actually establish a single global registry that in time we hope will include all individuals with hemophilia who participated in gene therapy, both once the products occur in the market, and hopefully the companies that have been leading the trials will provide the retrospective data for the clinical trials. Given the small number of individuals that will be eligible, we need as large a robust data set as possible. I've provided references at the bottom of the screen, but we've actually agreed now on a core outcome set that all of the registries that will either be participating directly or contributing through their national registries, such as Athens, have agreed to collect so that we can have a harmonized global data collection set. And not as specifically relevant, but the WFH has incorporated patient outcome data on patient relevant outcomes to look at efficacy in relation to other clinical data as a part of its global data set. So more granularly, next slide, please. On the World Federation of Hemophilia Registry, there are a couple objectives that we have defined. The primary objective is to track the safety of factor VIII and factor IX gene therapies in patients with hemophilia. And then secondarily, it's to look at the long-term efficacy and the durability, to try to identify what patterns there are and what we can learn in real-world experience, and then to assess the quality of life using the EQ5D, which is a generic public health instrument, so we can compare to other diseases, as well as the specific probe study instrument, which I showed on the last screen. Similar in vein to what Joanna said, this is a global collaboration. It has the support of industry colleagues and regulators, and the core participants here are the World Federation of Hemophilia, Athens, the International Society of Thrombosis and Hemostasis, the European Association of Hemophilia and Allied Disorders, and the National Hemophilia Foundation, along with the gene therapy partners, those who are conducting the trials. So we're really expecting robust data that might allow us to get more insights on many of the unknowns for gene therapy as we make critical decisions for the community going forward. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that there is a data set, but I think it's useful to sort of give you context as well, that we will be asking individuals who participate in gene therapy, in addition to the clinical follow-up that occurs, ideally, every individual who undergoes gene therapy will agree to participate in the registry, and you'll have a very simple handheld app where you can be prompted to do this or submit data as a part of regular clinic visits, but it'll occur every 3 months in the initial phase and then become annually Eventually, and the data will be captured one of two ways, either directly from a treatment center and fed in or through a registry such as Athen. And so as a part of the Athen Transcends project, they have a module previously known as Athen 14 that will collect the data. And so we've agreed on core safety data, and as new events emerge, then we can expand and rapidly capture that data worldwide. So small events and where we see clusters, we'll be able to hopefully have as near real time as possible with as large a data set as possible to actually track efficacy and safety and be able to match that against clinical and patient reported outcomes. Next slide, please. Our European colleagues have been a little bit ahead of us in terms of the safety surveillance piece on a pan-regional level. They developed a system called EUHAS, the European Hemophilia Safety Surveillance. And since their system was well established, what we have actually done at the World Federation level and Athen have both actually taken those metrics, and we have used those as the basis to build out the registry. So again, demonstrating that global collaboration and harmony so that we're all working on a common data set and can actually aggregate and look at issues, whether they be cardiovascular events or malignancy or neurotoxicity that might arise with any of the therapy. And the EUHAS registry covers all therapies, not just gene therapy, as does Athen and the WBDR. But we've been doing the harmonization specifically to think about the arrival of gene therapy, which we know will come to market with many unknowns that could only be understood over years or perhaps decades. Next slide, please. So I referenced the collaboration of Athen, and again here, really just to drive home the redundancy, you will see that the topics that Athen has identified are identical to those that I've talked about before. It is a pragmatic study design to understand the outcomes, and so you would have the opportunity to enroll through your treatment center at the time of gene therapy. The data collection that occurs as part of your regular clinic visits in Athen will be a part of this, and the redundancy and requirements to collect data. Athen's done a wonderful job to reduce the burden on the patients. And ideally, we will continue to collect the patient outcome data on patient relevant outcomes to know whether or not qualitatively, as well as from an efficacy and safety standpoint, it's making a difference. We'll have the ability to understand that both at the US level, at the regional or at the global level. And over time, we'll be reporting on this at intervals sort of to be determined as we see how gene therapy rolls out. Next slide, please. So many of you would be familiar with the CDC Community Counts Project. Most of us have either been passively or actively enrolled in one of the three arms of the Community Counts Project for many years or decades. It's undergone a name change midway along the way, but it is essentially the same project that we have all known and benefited from that was set up in the early time of viral infections. So Community Counts includes three components: a population profile, a registry for surveillance, and then mortality reporting. And again, you'll see here that the CDC collects a similar set of data. And this really allows us, between these sets of instruments, to have real-time surveillance of what's going on in the community as new treatments evolve, and to see what the impact of those are over time, and building that data out so we can have as much power as possible and aggregate that data in a comparable way. So the work that we've known for a long time at the CDC is now being complemented and augmented with the other regional and global programs. And the last slide, please, next slide, that I wanted to mention is because Nathan has talked about and Joanne has mentioned that we certainly do follow blood and plasma donation safety. One of the elements that as a community that we asked for at the time that they initially looked at revising donor deferral criteria, particularly as it relates to men who have sex with men, was that we didn't have a good longitudinal permanent system in place to look at transfusion transmissions as it relates to whole blood donation. The plasma from which is often recovered and used in the manufacture of products. So we thought it was very important to have a real-time system to do infection monitoring that would look at prevalence within donors, prevalence within actual donations, to look at the yields and the viral pathogens, as well as create a biospecimen repository. The current system that now is on stable and solid footing covers about 60% of the US blood supply. And so this now complements the work of what PPTA does with the source plasma collections. And we've had the chance to work with colleagues and to follow this work over time. And so they're just beginning to put out reports, and this is actually being used as part of the work that Nathan talked about with the advanced study, or understanding further changes to the donor deferral process for MSM or other regional or time deferrals that may occur for other events. And so we think this is an important addition, and we've been very pleased that it provides a backstop and a comfort level for us as a community that evolving needs are being tracked. And so with that, I would like to turn it back to my colleagues to join me, and we'll be happy to take your questions. Last slide, please.
As we're waiting for questions to come in, and again, encourage folks to throw those in the chat box if you have them. I wonder if we should take a minute and talk about the patient notification system as another, it's less a surveillance system as the ones you described, Mark, but it's another way for people to be notified, and it's something we often talk about in this session. I'm happy to keep talking, or if either of you wants to cover it, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I can cover it. And while I'm doing so, after I give an explanation, we can drop into the chat where you can go to sign up for the patient notification system, because it is a system whereby you can receive an alert. You can get it over text messages, you can get an email, you can get it snail mail, a hard copy, in the event that a product has been recalled. And it's been operated by our colleagues at PBTA, Plasma Protein Therapeutics Association, and it's been around for a really long time. They have updated it more recently because one of the things that we realized throughout all of those recalls that we experienced in 2019, many of the products, not many, some of the products that were recalled weren't plasma derived. So they actually had to expand their breadth of what they cover, because it wasn't just plasma products anymore. But PPTA has long operated the patient notification system, and if you want to sign up, it gives you real-time information about any kind of safety concerns or any kind of recall.
Would encourage people, I put the link in the chat box to check it out. I think it's a real kind of core tenet of kind of advocacy in our community, I think, is to be patient-centered. And, while if there's ever a recall or safety issue, NHF and HFA try and get information out as quickly as possible. So does your pharmacy, so does your HTC. But I think there's something really empowering about signing up as a person who uses a product to know that, to make sure you're notified directly as well.
One of our corporate, no, I'll take the question that was just posted by Greg, but I was just going to comment. I think it's really important that the real-time reporting, as patients, and particularly those of us that lived through the 80s, we really wanted to know as soon as anyone knew. And this system was put in the wake of the previous medical disasters, so that we don't have to wait for the information to go to your clinician, to the HTC, and for them to send it out, but we're expecting direct communication in as near real time as possible. And at least for me as an individual who's grown up and lived through that period, I think it's a great asset. And it's very painless and non-intrusive, and certainly anonymous. You can sign up for as many products as you wish. And no manufacturer nor even NHF know sort of who you are and what you're getting. So it's a redundancy, it's belts and suspenders both from all of the other mechanisms. Let me take the question that was posted, one of the questions that was posted in the chat. So the question was, the complexity of developing an international registry, and I absolutely agree. I mean, what the hemophilia community, and I say hemophilia recognizing that we're looking at bleeding disorders generally, but gene therapy will be first for hemophilia and then hopefully in time for the others. and the systems could be expanded, we really are breaking new ground as a rare disease organization and trying to build a global collaboration. The systems that we are trying to set up really don't exist globally for rare diseases. So initially, and I do have the privilege to serve on the steering committee for the WFH registry, initially it was set up after consultation with the Food and Drug Administration in the United States and the European Medicines Agency, which covers Europe, and really seeking input from them on the kinds of questions that they would like for real-time monitoring, as well as the International Standardization Committee of the ISTH, the International Society of Thrombosis and Hemostasis. And then certainly the patient voice represented through me and others to make sure the kinds of questions that we wanted to know were there. And so it has taken us several years, and we started on this probably well before it became primetime news. We started really trying to work together with a very long list and then pare it down to a set of core outcomes, and then work to harmonize those definitions to align the major existing data collection agencies, and then now have been reaching out to all of the countries where gene therapy trials are ongoing. And there is an industry advisory committee, and they fully participate to get the buy-in of the sponsors of these therapies, both current and previous. So there's been a lot of cudgeling, but we've had very great support from the FDA and the EMA. And in fact, I didn't include the reference in the slides, but they actually wrote a commentary piece for us in hemophilia that talked about the importance and their encouragement for it. So we think we're well on our way. It's entirely anonymous, and it will be aggregated. I mean, in terms of, for us, the data will be aggregated, but you'll be able to go in and follow up, and hopefully we'll be producing reports. So despite the complexity, we think it's a wonderful step. And it allows us to be real time as opposed to what we were doing in the 80s, which was reacting and talking about an absence of data. We're trying to get ahead of a future therapy. So I think it's novel, it's groundbreaking for rare disease, and we should be very fortunate that we've been able to put this together.
Thanks so much, Mark. I see another question that I think might also be best addressed by you. Have you worked with manufacturers to ensure that the core outcomes are incorporated in clinical trials as well, and registries as part of the process before products come to market?
I think that's a great question. So the clinical trials and their clinical trial design was well established. The trials have gone on for years before we started the registry, but they have safety surveillance obligations and reporting. And so many of these metrics are covered and captured. And as new findings develop, there are data safety monitoring boards that occur within each of the clinical trials, and they would be reporting and collecting that data. So we do believe for the ongoing trials, there are existing mechanisms that the FDA mandates. We don't know what the post-market obligations will be from the FDA for the gene therapy companies once they're approved. The FDA has been talking about a 15-year horizon. As a community, we have been asking for lifetime monitoring in a longer period. And by setting up this registry, which has community and broad stakeholder support, hopefully we'll be able to move beyond that. And in those post-market obligations, the companies would be collecting and ideally reporting to the extent mandated by the FDA, and then we would fill in the missing data through the clinical encounters of patients or being self-reported. So sort of a two-step process, what happens pre and what happens post-market authorization.
Well, and Mark, Nathan, I'll toss the next question to you, but before I do, I know there's also kind of a separate project to define which core outcomes in a trial would be most relevant and important to people with hemophilia and other bleeding disorders. So while the data collection systems, the surveillance systems may not be the same, I know there also has been an effort to have the clinical development be patient-centered and use patient important outcomes. And so maybe Greg was also teeing you up to mention that, I'm not sure.
There is, in fact, a project called Core Heme where we tried to bring all stakeholders together, and we published and aligned on a core set of 6 outcomes that we thought were important to differentiate standard of care prophylaxis with a curative technology that gene therapy has the potential to be. And how would we actually measure that efficacy? So looking at elements such as factor activity level, bleed rate, resource utilization, and then a couple important patient-centric elements were in that top 6. The experience of chronic pain and the mental health transformation that would come from being cured in that transformational experience. And currently there's a study ongoing to actually try to define an outcome instrument where we could actually measure and quantify over time sort of the freedom that comes from living without a bleeding disorder and what that experience means. So we'll collect both economic, safety, and qualitative data, and they were all endorsed by Core Heme, and those elements are all embedded in the registry, and ideally the companies are collecting those, and many are in their pivotal studies.
Thanks so much. Nathan, to turn to you, a question, can you talk a little more about when the next safety summit might be, and maybe you could share a little bit about what we've talked about in terms of what might happen there?
Yes, I can. Yes, there will be another safety summit. I don't know when it will be. I also don't know that it'll be an annual event. What we've talked about is possibly having it every other year. But honestly, it's really what the community desires. The reception for the first one, it was very well received. So thank you, Greg, for the feedback. And definitely everybody wanted us to put it on again, so we will. I just don't know when at this point. But while I have this platform, I will put it out there that one of the things that we will be looking for is additional patient perspectives. We did have a few patients that were either directly impacted by a recent product recall or represented many patients who were very concerned about all of the recent activities. So if anybody listening in today either has been impacted or is very concerned about these safety considerations, please let us know. We are, we definitely are looking to expand the number of patient perspectives that we will have whenever we finally are able to reconvene the next safety summit.
And so Nathan, if I could give you just a bit of, could I give a bit of kudos, because the work that NHF and HFA did, and I was a passenger on this train, not a driver. So to compliment to you and Joanna, who were part of the lead, is the World Federation of Hemophilia has taken note of what the work that has been done here. It's the reason that it was an invited presentation at the coming Global Summit, and perhaps this will spur the opportunity to development of a global set of core principles that the community, both within US, Europe, and globally, expect in reporting, so that we actually have harmony of reporting and we can eliminate some of the kinds of issues that came up in the safety summit where one set of rules required reporting in Europe and another in the US, and there were time differentials. That hopefully this work will actually lead in terms of the pharma reporting of what happens within a trial or post-market to a more harmonized standard. So again, NHF is helping us lead on this along with HFA. So kudos.
Well, and I'll just add one more thought on the safety summit. I mean, I was very, very impressed with the commitment from all of our kind of industry partners to showing up, to being honest, to their, commitment to safety. And I think there was so much consensus about what the right thing to do is that I almost think Safety Summit 2.0 is how do we operationalize what everyone knows should happen. The FDA sets a floor about what kinds of notifications should happen when there's a recall, for example. I think because of everything the community's been through, we have much higher standards or much higher expectations, I should say, than what the floor should be. So how can we, and that's not just aimed at the pharma industry, it's at all stakeholders as part of the community. How can we make sure we're all living up to the best practices that were identified? So to Nathan's point, if anybody here would be interested, definitely reach out to one of us and we're happy to loop you in. I see a question about NHF's efforts in informing policymakers about gene therapy being kind of in our near future. And I guess I'll say that I think policymakers are still really trying to wrap their arms around gene therapy and how to pay for it, how to cover it. You know, our medical system is really good at paying for widgets and doctor's visits and, you know, things that happen regularly and that are less expensive, frankly, than gene therapy is expected to be. It's much more difficult to think about a reimbursement system for something that you take today that will have durable effects, hopefully. So we have tried to be part of those conversations around what reimbursement systems should look like and kind of what access should look like. I think we would all say that given all the potential benefits and risks of gene therapy, we would want anyone receiving gene therapy to be at a real kind of hemophilia treatment center of excellence. And so we have been kind of advocating for that as well. So this is where, you know, we are a leading patient voice, but not the only voice. There are other patient communities where gene therapy has come on the market and many, many others where it's coming behind us. So it's something where we're all trying to, you know, speak with one voice wherever we can.
So Joanne, I could just elaborate just briefly. So, and this was actually the subject of a talk I gave in the medical program. So to the extent you want more than what I'm going to say, feel free to go over to the health equity session where I describe it in a lot more detail. But an organization called the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review has been doing studies of gene therapy in preparation for whether it would be cost effective and what it would look like when it comes to the market. And they did a study last year looking at hemophilia gene therapy, Valrox specifically, and although it didn't make it to market, I would expect they will refresh the study when in fact the application is resubmitted or possibly for hemophilia B. And so there is a lot of background work being done with payers to help them to begin to think about how to define value. And many of the registry and data collection tools that I've talked about will be abundantly important as we try to feed data into that process so that our perspectives can be modeled, which we did not have the ability to do before. So there is a strong linkage between the systems I talked about and where we want to go. And the other thing that I did forget to mention, to the extent that anybody's interested in core heme and the mental health component that we're now working on, there is a poster at this session. So please go to the NHF poster session and look up the core heme poster, where you'll actually be able to learn quite a bit more about our specific project.
And I see there's a question about manufacturers who are developing internal policies to provide fast and transparent mechanisms when safety issues occur and whether or not we'd be open to collaborating on that effort. Yes, by all means, we'd love to learn more about what those internal mechanisms look like. And we would absolutely be interested in learning more and collaborating. And I can't speak officially on behalf of HFA, but I will say that on safety considerations and recent activities, NHF and HFA have been in lockstep at every juncture. And so I can't speak for them, but I imagine they would definitely agree and be willing and amenable to those conversations.
And I think we're winding down on time, I think. So I guess I'll start the thank yous and just say thanks everybody for joining us tonight. You know, it's much more fun when we can all be in a ballroom in some random hotel than over Zoom, but we really appreciate your interest. And if you have any questions about anything we talked about today or something that we didn't that kind of falls in this arena, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to chat with you or to think about our structure for the session next year. Mark, Nathan, any final words of wisdom to share with the group?
No, I would just echo my thanks. And, you know, this is a year-round 24/7 project. Sometimes it happens on Friday afternoon and sometimes it happens on Monday morning. So we will do our best to keep you informed. But please, if anything comes to mind and you've not heard from us, never hesitate to reach out, you know, through NHF or any of us directly if you if you wish. It takes a community to actually do this work, and we've accomplished a lot together.
Indeed. Keep in mind, if you complete the evaluation, you're eligible for a $75 gift card. So please, we really do appreciate the feedback and incorporate it into our plans. This is a session that we have every year because it's so important to the community. So you can bet we will have it again next year. But if there are other themes or topics you want us to hit upon, please complete the evaluation. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. I hope you have great weekends